Bendetta Panisson is a visual artist from Venice working with film photography, video, and performance, interweaving art practice with academic research. She is engaged in PhD research at Durham University, which focuses on sexual visual productions and imaginaries in insular spaces. And she's interested in the nexus among visual studies, queer studies, and art practice. As an islander herself, she approaches insular communities, intimacies, and sensual practices, developing both academic research and artistic projects. She has a BA in History of Arts at Ca' Foscari University and MA in Performing Arts at Brera Academy Milan. She has exhibited in international museums, galleries, and institutions. In Italy, she's represented by OPR Gallery. Among her participations and academic collaborations are at Onassis Cultural Center in Athens, Royal College of Arts London, Museum of Contemporary Art of Tenerife, Spain, OPR Gallery Milan, Contingent Movements Archive in Maldives Pavilion, and I think you have won several prizes as well, and that's International Prize for Performance, del Grief Frias Art, Galleria Riccardo Crespi at Milano Bicocca University. All right, yeah, thank you so much, Benedetta, for agreeing to present today, and
thank you so much. This is in loop. It's like a 6 minutes video, and it's what I'm talking about. Okay, the title is "The Sexuality of the Uncontacted on a Videotape." Since the mid-19th century, visual technology has exploited territories considered peripheral, constructive sexual peripheries, such as in oceanic islands. Visibility of nudity deemed perverse and to be tamed, assimilated sexuality to hostility, supporting exotic and erotic imagery and ethnographic data. I argue that gender and queer studies, side by side with indigenous studies, can give a different field of interpretation. A 1998 footage recorded in North Sentinel, Andaman Islands, and analyzed by Vishnavit Pandya, protected by India, but crossed by British settlers and anthropologists and illegal tourism, shows one of the approaches to the island, and it has a sexual content. Coconuts are thrown from the boat. Some natives pick them up. Other makes gestures deemed sexual and considered as obscene and hostile. A question. In 1998, how can Sentinelese, deemed unaffected by Western and Central Indian sexual culture and morality, make deliberately hostile sexual gestures? Here, I analyze the notion of sexual diversity in indigenous studies in oceanic islands with the aim of diffusing the hostility-sexuality pair, both as a visual artist and islander myself. The contacted island. Since 1996, Indian authority has been protecting North Sentinel from physical contact, avoiding epidemiological contamination and respecting the natives' voluntary isolation. It is an eyes-on and hands-off policy. The legal physical distance is offset by a constant visual control by air outside the no-fly area, and by sea beyond 5 kilometers, and by satellite. What does uncontacted mean in relation to visuality? In a people deemed uncontacted, how is an hypothetically sexual manifestation perceived? Sexual images. The visual production about North Sentinel constitute an emblematic non-consensual case. Visual recordings that over time have been categorized as sexual have generated assumptions, eroticisms, media sensationalism, producing an interpretative disproportion dynamic. What is their affective, erotic, and artistic value in addition to the historical one? After Maurice Vidal Portman's violent colonial photographic project that grounded in 1895 this flow of images from Andaman Islands, it was after 1916 that the Indian government planned cultural contact with the Sentinelese, with a series of exploration coordinated by the anthropologist Triloknath Pandit. In 1970, Pandit spotted a Sentinelese group on the beach. They laid down their weapons and were joined by women. They began to hug each other, lying on the sand. The event was called a beach orgy or community mating. In 2018, popular media widespread this sexual case following the killing of John Allen Chow. The American missionary violated the law landing in North Sentinel, where he was killed by an arrow after repeated warnings. We know about his Christian fanaticism thanks to his diary, published by his mother after his death. He wanted to convert the tribe because it was, in his words, the Satan last stronghold. It is relevant how media connected the killing of the missionary with an immoral tribe in his mind in 2018 to the hypothetical orgy in 1970. Despite this sensationalism, global public opinion and Indian law are by the side of the Sentinelese. In 1974, the Anthropological Survey of India produced the documentary Man in Search of Man. As the boat approached, the Sentinelese defended themselves with arrows. The film's rhetoric of unchanging primitives is summed up by the voiceover of the documentary. I quote it. Do they not convey some message from the past which intellectuals has forgotten? And I had. From the 1960s to the 1990s, the island was controlled by the AAIVS State Welfare Agency, overseeing the so-called primitive tribal groups. The rhetoric of isolation and primitive status and hostility promoted the use of telephoto lenses capable of distorting magnification at the distance. Contact groups consisted of anthropologists and administrators, doctors, but also guests and friends. Sentinelese repeatedly defended themselves. These images promoted more contacts and illegal tourism, primitive safaris, they call it like that, endangering the island. Administration adopted a harder contact prohibition and control on images produced about North Sentinel. In 1991, the anthropologist Madhumala Chattopadhyay was the first to establish close contact. The Sentinelese touched the boat, took the coconuts, she interacted with them. She never returned there. Her words, the tribes of the islands do not need outsiders to protect them. What they need is to be left alone. We don't know if the female presence or the small boat may have contributed to the diversity of this encounter. This is the 1998 footage on which we focus and was recorded during an authorized expedition with the anthropologist Vishwajit Pandya. Boats approached throwing coconuts, some male and female natives dive into the water and to pick them up. Some Sentinelese males touch their genitals in the direction of the boat. One expedition man exclaims, is touching genitals, is he hungry? The reaction off screen associates sexual gestures with hunger. Pandya's words about this. Circumspect about visitors, Sentinelese make what administrative authorities have long regarded as obscene sexual gestures. I'm adding, in the eyes of authorities, they are obscene. In the eyes of gender and queer studies, from my point of view, this word is a red flag. The notion of obscenity never goes beyond morality. What sexual regulation is this obscenity referring to? What Sentinelese sexuality results as non-obscene? Further, gestures are framed as typical and recurrent. This creates a shadow. The typical sexual gestures of a tribe are obscene, that is opposed to decency. Thus, on the one hand, the Sentinelese people are constructed in an isolation framework. On the other, they are forced into a judgment that cannot be applied to a group deemed outside that constitutionality. This footage is on YouTube. That is why it's here. A man touching his penis, where this is forbidden. And I'm not saying that I agree with the YouTube sexual regulations. Is this ethnographic concession or nonsense in 2022? The footage has 4 million views. In the late 19th century, under the Obscenity Act, and according to Lisa Siegel, in Europe and United States, postcards of Western nude women could not be sent unless with covered genitals. Instead, nudity could be sent from Pacific Islands and or Africa as ethnographic purposes. From Biddle Portman's photographic coloniality to YouTube visibility, there is a fil rouge. Pandya's interpretation is important, and I quote him. As the Sentinelese enact these purportedly sexually charged gestures, the contact team remains on guard in anticipation of an imminent attack. It is not clear what the implications of these acts are, though I have observed similar farcical actions on the part of another Andamanese group, the Jarawas. I'm heading. The hypothesis that such gestures are farcical leads us to reflect on a nonverbal form of communication that could have several messages. In his words, my own understanding of this X points to the possibility that the Sentinelese were trying to dissuade us from photographing them or even seeking to inquire if we had metal for their arrowheads. Readings like mine are at best discouraged, at the worst ignored. The discursive and visual frames of hostility overlay all other readings. I emphasize an additional ignored reading. I would add that the gesture on the genitals could also have sexual communication value. It is only another reading, but discarding it is an interdict. I shared the footage with my daughter. She's 9 years old, and she said maybe they are thanking them. Also, this hypothesis, ironically, is omitted. In the line of genitality and pleasure fertility, Thanksgiving seems possible. We got an example in Australia while Beery placing penis in a host hand is a welcoming sign, refusing it a sign of hostility. But in that case, they know their language and not in this case. Regarding the sexual farce, it is a cultural expression, of course, but sometimes it is a risky association and pair. So farce and sexual, close to the notion of queer in its 19th century acception. Some sexual displays can be farcical to a public while not being farce. They may be ridiculous, but only in relation to others. A similar case happened to Margaret Mead while studying some girl's sexuality in 1920. In 1983, Derek Freeman argued that Mead's precursor study about gender as cultural construct had no ethnographic value and was nothing more than a Samoan girl's joke to mock the anthropologist. How could Samoans share a sex farce with Margaret Mead that, reported in her text, could challenge the US gender education system of her time? The joke hypothesis was later academically rejected. I argued that when sexual display becomes hostile or farcical, it is coherent to submit it to a queer gaze and related analysis. Two curious dynamics in animal studies and porn studies. A cultural dynamic that lets emerge a structure in this seesawing perception between sexual gestures and hostility happens in the field of animal studies. Often, animal ornaments like feathers, horns, colors are considered by science to be part of the courtship apparatus or weapons, ornaments that are perceived as armaments. This is the case, for example, of the auklet, a seabird, and its facial ornamentation. And several scientists hypothesized their showy tuft had aerodynamic or defensive function. As pointed out by Adolf Portman in 1948, they are only prepared to see horns as weapons or as sexual character. Both these explanations are true, but they forget that this view does not enable us to grasp fully the peculiar shape and position of these structures. Perceiving ornaments as armaments and vice versa, what affective and cultural structures does it move? Another parallel dynamic comes from the porn studies. Some sexual visual materials can result hostile or enjoyable. In 1970, Women Against Pornography group argued that pornography is a theory, rape is the practice, a feminist battle against pornography at all. As noted by Linda Williams, the problem with the perception of sexual imagery as hostile is that there is a single sexual truth to which deviance is opposed. This idea is the central fallacy of all the anti-porn feminist positions, that the single wall sexuality exists opposed to the supposed deviations and abnormalities of somebody else's fragmentation. Following Linda Williams, what over sexuality defines another's as hostile or farcical? Conclusion. North Sentinel visual sexuality is a sharing space of mutual knowing and non-knowing, a common space that exceeds its own boundaries, and not a space of otherness. North Sentinel sexual culture and practice must be respected as their ecological and epidemiological system, language, everything that constitutes humanity, of course. I'm quoting Christine Hansen and the very discussed Skin Flicks 1989 paper. We seek to make strangeness known, or more precisely, to know strangeness. We want to know it and want to know it as strangeness as such, to know that by being beheld as strange, it continues to elude full comprehension. Today, can we reorient ourselves in what has been produced? If what has been produced is repairable, we can move beyond the strangeness that determines suspicious reading toward the sense of aware intimacy and relaxed exorbitance, overcoming the limits of hostility and toward a sensual release of the tension that sometimes characterize the will to knowledge. Thank you.